Welcome to Reddit Town Hall. Subscribe for daily videos. Serious, what's the creepiest experience you've ever had while camping? Was out camping with a cousin of mine and I was asleep in my tent. In the middle of the night I felt something touching and slithering in me. I ignored it at first, believing that I was still home and it was my brother or some shit, but then when I finally realized where I was and opened my eyes, it was a caterpillar. Scariest shit I've experienced in my whole life. When I was a kid, we used to go on camping trips in the summer with my parents' caravan. One year, my sister and I decided that we wanted to sleep in a small tent instead, which was set up directly in front of the caravan. We didn't even make it one night. Every now and then the both of us clearly heard the sound of something rubbing against the tent. We were scared shitless, because we thought someone was walking around our tent. I don't remember how we got out of the tent. I guess we started screaming for our parents at one point or something. My father took a look around and we tried again, but after a while, heard the same sounds again. We ended up sleeping in the caravan anyway. A few days later we still didn't want to sleep in the tent, so my father started to disassemble it. Turns out, some animals built tunnels directly under the tent and in doing so, rubbed against the bottom wall. We didn't notice anything, because we were lying on inflatable mattresses. We only heard the sound of them rubbing against the wall. It's pretty funny now, but damn were we creeped out at the time. I think I have the creepiest story. We used to have a stationary caravan on a campground right at the Northern Sea. The campground was very small. There were like 40 to 50 caravans stationed there and a few empty slots for people with tents. We stayed there for holiday one year and for some reason left a day earlier than we had planned. And in that particular night, someone got murdered right next to our caravan. It was two women sleeping in a rented caravan, and the ex-boyfriend of one of the women went to that camping ground at night and stabbed his ex and her friend. They dragged themselves out of the caravan and died right next to our caravan. Our caravan was on the first page of all newspapers, was in the news on TV. It was crazy. Hadn't we left a day early, we'd have seen that women die. Here's an article about the murder, https://www. has /Nachrichten/Panorama/Übersicht/30-jährige Doppelmord auf Campingplatz. I was camping in the woods one weekend. When I got up in the morning, someone had made a cup of tea and partially drank it and left out next to my fire. It was a solo camp. My girlfriend at the time and I went camping 5 hours away from home for her birthday/our anniversary. We made the trip the day after a big storm passed through. We left town early and got there in the early afternoon. The guy at the entrance to the campgrounds mentioned there was no one else staying there that weekend. We were like, oh, this is gonna be sick. First, we drove down these long pathways to our designated area. As you got closer to it, the road narrowed. So basically, you had to back out to get out. We unloaded the car, got the tent set up, and decided to go walk around the woods. It was dead silent. But it was still bright out, so we just took in all the nature we could and walked a few miles away. We reached this point in the woods where there were some weird-looking white cabins. They were very uniform, all built the exact same way. Like, I guess they were a part of the camping grounds, but they seemed way out of the way, and there was no sign of life. It felt eerie to be at, like we shouldn't be there. So we turned around and walked back. We took a breather in the tent, then tried to start a fire in the fire pit. Unfortunately, neither of us had ever been camping before, and had no idea how to start a fire. We had bought some of those self-lighting logs from Walmart and some lighter fluid. But everything else around us was soaked to the bone from the rain that had passed through the day before. We knew we needed kindling of some sort, but any dry sticks or leaves was far and few between. Eventually, we got a small fire going and ate hot dogs and marshmallows and spent some time look at the stars. Then we noticed just how dark it was out there. My girlfriend was easily spooked and was like, "Can we get into the tent now?" So we put the fire out and crawled into the tent. We were talking to each other, but I could tell she was tense. Suddenly, she put her hand over my mouth and was like, "Shh. Do you hear that?" Before I could respond, we heard footsteps. Like heavy footsteps. It sounded like a group of people walking. I whispered to her, "It's probably just animals or something." Then we heard mumbling. Like low mumbling. We couldn't make out words, but it didn't sound like a sound an animal could make. It sounded like words but hushed and non-elaborated. We sat in silence staring at each other in the dark for what felt like forever. The mumbling got louder, as did the footsteps, until it sounded like it was right outside of our tent. We both froze. I don't think either of us were breathing. And then, silence. We waited and waited and waited. I'm still not sure how much time passed. Eventually, my girlfriend said, "We have to get to your car." The adrenaline was pumping, so I peeked out of the tent into the darkness and told her to stay behind me. Then we ran to the car. I locked the doors and she was like, "What the fuck was that? We can't stay here. No one is out here but us." What was that? I kept looking around for any signs of life, but we were seemingly alone. I looked at her and was like, "Okay. I'm gonna grab our stuff, you stay in the car." We only had our ice chest and our tent out. I hopped out and ran, grabbed our ice chest, tossed it into the back seat. As I turned around to go get the tent, I started hearing footsteps closing in again. In a moment of pure terror, I yanked the tent out of the ground, wrapped the tarp around it, and slung it over my shoulder. Like some panicked Santa Claus, and shoved it into the trunk. I didn't say anything when I got in the car except, "Do we have everything in here?" My girlfriend said yes, and I floored it in reverse out of our camping area. Then we came to a fork in the road that went in like 6 different directions. I asked my girlfriend if she remembered which path we came down to get in here, and she told me she didn't know. We chose a random one and ended up in a different camping spot. I cursed under my breath and slammed it into reverse again. Then I noticed from the angle we had exited from, I could see the main path back to the gate, thanks to a small sign behind an overgrown bush. As we hightailed it out of there, I noticed there was a single, small green light out in the woods to our right, near where our designated spot was. We drove the entire 5 hours back to our hometown and fell asleep on my girlfriend's parents' couch at around 4 a.m. We never talked about the trip ever again, and I haven't had any desire to camp since lol. When I was a teen, me and 2 friends went camping and woke up in the middle of the night to a knife scraping along the sides on the tent at waist height. It went on for what was probably only a minute but felt like a lifetime. Then it stopped and we waited maybe an hour and left without unpacking the tent. Later that week we found out it was one of our friends that we hadn't invited. She had followed us and waited. Creepy AF. Edit for more context. The friend in question, S, admitted that it was her when accusing us of being bad friends for not inviting her along. She had no remorse for what she did and just laughed it off. I have no contact with her and haven't for years, but this post had made me wonder where she is now. I always felt really bad for her, even though I didn't fully comprehend her situation at home until I was older. Her mom was an alcoholic, her dad showed up every few months and banned her from leaving the house. He also used to sneak into her bedroom at night. She broke his fingers once and he didn't show back up for a long time. S had the kind of OCD where she had to turn taps, light switches, open and close doors etc. a certain amount of times, and she always had to navigate streets the same way. Her number changed every Sunday. On a good week it would be 3, on a bad week she would always be late because the number was so high. After writing this, I am the one who feels so bad about the camping incident. She probably felt abandoned by us, and that's why she did what she did. While camping with my class on a fun weekend canoeing trip, I woke up at night and heard someone running around outside the tent, and its breathing sounded like what I can only describe, as an adult with my years of experience, as someone trying not to panic or not to cry openly, not quite sobbing but clearly freaking out, sort of wheezing. You know what I mean? It was very clearly a two-footed creature, but it sounded very small and fast. We were all at least 13, so we weren't that tiny. None of us were. It ran all around the camp in all directions but never touched anything, and then it ran away, its quick steps getting lighter and lighter until it was gone in the distance. I was lying on my back listening the whole time, and then as it left I turned onto my side. And the kid beside me in the tent was awake with her wide eyes staring straight at me, blankly. I was like, "You got woken up too?" And she nodded and then turned over. I asked her about it the next day and she didn't remember. Nobody remembered. I tried to bring it up, but the teacher insinuated that I was just making it up for attention, so I gave up. No idea what the fuck is was. If you have an idea, let me know. Edit, I have another story. This one probably has an explanation though. I was with my aunt/cousin and their family camping in an old 70s camper by a lake. It had been raining all evening, and the wind was pretty crazy, so we were all freaking out a bit as our camper rocked around in the storm, but eventually we got to bed. In the middle of the night I woke up with the moon streaming in through the window on my face. I remember it being really bright, enough to easily read by. So I sat up slowly and looked out the window, with a clear view through the trees to the lake, and the moon had its reflection glittering on the water. It was very beautiful. But on the water seemed to be something that flew around much like a moth or a bug would, in a strange dance where it would almost touch the water but then go up again, like it was teasing or faking out. It would go around in circles, not evenly or anything but just repeatedly, and if I were to calculate the size of it going by how far out on the lake it was, it'd be about the size of a cat, and I saw its reflection on the water, so it wasn't a bug or a trick of the light. It was difficult to make out what it actually was. It just went around and around, illuminated in the moonlight, until its circles grew wide enough that it went behind the trees. I kept watching, hoping it'd come back out again, but it never did. Slept in my car and woke up to arm and handprint on the window. My dad and grandpa like to fish and hunt a lot. One night they decided to spend the night on the river in the Appalachian Mountains. It was really late and they said they heard these awful screams coming from the woods on the opposite side of the river. He said it was inhuman and definitely not a mountain lion or anything like that. He would know. My dad is a pretty big guy and doesn't scare very easily. But in that moment he was frozen with fear and just held his breath until the screams finally stopped. He felt like whatever it was knew that they were there, and wasn't happy about it. It gives him goosebumps just thinking about it. Needless to say, they won't fish there at night anymore. Woke up to a deep gruff breathing sound outside my tent and a terrible smell. I froze solid but eventually had the courage to look through the rainfly, and sure enough there was a big old black bear, less than 3 yards away from where I was sleeping. Eventually he wandered off. Thankfully we hung our food bags on the other side of the campsite and he wasn't able to get to them. Seeing a bear that close makes the hairs on your neck go up fast. A large cougar encircled our tent on the West Coast Trail and was sniffing the tent in the middle of the night. In the morning his tracks were all around us in the damp sand. My wife heard it, but I was asleep the whole time. Headed to the toilet block in the middle of the night and see 100 kangaroos sitting motionless staring at you. When I was 7 in Florida we went camping near a spring we swam at quite often. I woke up one morning and went down to the spring to wash up and there was a huge gator on the bank that hissed at me. It had to be 15 to 20 feet long, easily 5x my height. I stopped, and noped right out. My ex and I went camping with one of her friends a few years back. We were sitting around the fire and drinking when this dude just decided he wanted to join us. Not mountain man or anything, just one of those weekend outdoorsman types. I'd have been fine if he had introduced himself, or bothered to ask if he could share our fire or something, but no, he just wandered out from the brush and plopped his ass down without a word. We just sat in silence for what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute before he started talking about his day hiking and making random small talk. My mom's boyfriend watching us. We would never have known, But he couldn't handle it when we all started talking shit about him. All of the sudden he speaks up from the shadows, LMFAO. I have spent a ton of time in the wood, camping and hunting. I was camping with family and we heard the most horrific and animalistic sound coming through the trees. It was night and we had a lantern, so a small ring of light with pitch black beyond. Our dog shot straight up, hackled, and the terrifying, guttural growling and animal screaming got closer. We all braced for some monster to come spilling from the darkness, adrenaline pumping, dog fighting to break free. Suddenly the animals burst into the light. It was two raccoons fighting. They stopped, looked at us and kinda had the "oh shit" look on their faces and kinda sidled back into the darkness. To this day it is still the most terrifying experience I've had in the wood. I was in the Sierra Nevada many years ago by myself, tucked away in my sleeping bag when the entire sky lit up a bright red. I put on my glasses and saw a giant red ball slowly blazing across the night sky towards Earth. I thought either the alien invasion has finally started or humanity was going to follow in the footsteps of the dinosaurs. Turns out it was a Chinese rocket. https://www.npr.org/sections/theta/way/2016/07758732/Western US saw an amazing light show last night courtesy of chinaps://www.youtube.com/watch V equals FFPL 36N68A and T equals 157S. The video in the link didn't truly capture the size of the fallen rocket. It's like seeing a picture of any natural wonder like El Capitan in Yosemite. You don't truly understand the scale of the thing until you see it in person. It was a benign event, but at the time I was expecting the apocalypse. Not my experience but my mom's, and the reason she didn't let any of my siblings and I go camping. She had gone camping with her friends sometime in the 80s. It was the first time she had ever gone and she didn't exactly know anything about camping. The way she tells it, her friends picked the most isolated place in the woods that they could so they could drink, underaged, without anyone coming along to check on them. After partying until about 1 in the morning they decided to go down for the night. My mom woke up and had heard some noises and shook her friend awake as she was scared. Her friend just assured her it was animals and normal and to go back to sleep. So she did. The next morning they woke up to large boot prints circling around their tent and campfire. The footprints came from the woods and left in the same direction. They couldn't trace it further because of the foliage. They packed up and left that day even though they were supposed to be there for a week. Apparently they weren't the only ones this happened to, and boot prints were found a number of times over the next 2 years. No one was ever caught doing it. Went camping with my family when I was little. I remember one night there were bears, probably 2, that came to our campsite in the middle of the night. They came to our tent and I remember seeing their noses pressed up against the tent. My dad stayed up all night with his rifle in his hand. Luckily nothing happened and they just left. Went camping with some new friends once, and one demanded he not share a tent with anyone because he sleepwalks. After we had already made the plans that he would share a tent with one friend while my girlfriend and I would have our own. Said whatever, was kind of pissed about it but left it so we could still enjoy the weekend. GF and I shared an awkward tent with basically a rando. That night, I was woken up by my GF who said, "First friend's name is freaking me out." So, I looked outside. The tent and dude is just walking in circles. I told her he sleepwalks so we just need to keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. Like 30 seconds later, he starts screaming hello at the top of his lungs. And that goes on for a while. Just standing in the middle of the campsite screaming. At this point we're all awake and watching him like WTF. Then he turns toward the woods, screams hello, and points his fucking pistol into the nothingness, luckily away from us. Now, up to this point I didn't even know he brought his gun. So, I went ahead and got mine out too because I was thinking like shit, he is going to sleep shoot us. But he doesn't. Instead he put his gun down, went into his tent, and went immediately back to sleep. Next morning I asked him what the fuck he was doing. Turned out he was not asleep and he thought he had heard coyotes, so his first thought was to wander off by himself into the night instead of waking any of us up. I never camped with him again. A few years later, he made the news for scaring the shit out of an entire campsite one night because he was running through the woods and firing his gun erratically because he saw Bigfoot and was trying to track him down. Really weird guy. Avid backpacker, trekker and mountaineer. April 2015 I was on a 100 miles adventure in Grand Escalate in southern Utah. I was camped out about 5 miles from Coyote Gulch and in the middle of the night there was this ear-piercing screech unlike anything I've ever heard before. I've heard most game noises, but this sounded almost artificial and it felt like it was overhead. I was nervous because of the WTF moment, but I popped out of my tent and just saw this colorful swirl in the sky like a Van Gogh paint stroke and just stood there, jaw dropped, and went right back into my tent, took an assload of melatonin and knocked the fuck out. I didn't really question it for a long time. I honestly tried to forget it because it just feels weird even thinking about it. I needed to shit, so I went out into the woods at night away from the campsite and I had this strange feeling something was stalking me. I hurried back and come to find out there was a fucking mountain lion not even 10 feet from me. I found out because the people camping next to us had spotted it a couple hours before sundown. A few years ago, my stepbro invited us to go camping with them in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. It was miles from civilization. We couldn't even get a cell signal. We rented a pop-up trailer and bought a huge tent for the kids. We set up the tent right outside the pop-up. Stepbro's camper was on the other side of the tent. The second night we were there, in the middle of the night, a truck pulled up to our camp with their headlights off. They left the truck running while they exited the vehicle. They didn't even close the doors behind them. Husband grabbed our 9mm and opened the trailer door at the same time stepbro stepped out of his camper with his shotgun. The men didn't say a word. They just turned around and got back in their truck. We hadn't seen anyone else up until that point. Wonder what they wanted? When I was around 8 or 10, I went camping and when it was dark I went to the nearby river to wash a bit before going to sleep. I was standing in the river with a headlight, so I turned around and saw some squiggly snake thing swimming in the water and it scared the shit out of me. I ran out of the water to call my mom. What sounded like a dozen coyotes about 40 feet from our tent while camping during early spring, circling around while yipping for 30 minutes straight. Taking a dump in the woods at night when a pair of eyes charged towards me. I thought it was a wolf. Crap, what a way to go. But it was a friendly farm dog. When I was in middle school, my whole class went on a 5-day camping trip. On the first night we set up our tents and went to bed. At about 2 or 3 a.m. I and the others in my tent woke up because some sort of large animal was poking at our tent. We also heard the sounds of wolves and heard the screaming of some kind of animal. Everyone was scared for the rest of the camping trip and we all got little to no sleep. Went on a camping trip with school. Slept in massive tents that held like 7 people per tent. Woke up in the middle of the night, not sure what time but it was late. I knew this because the campfire wasn't lit, and after we all went into our tents the teachers would stay out. So I wake up confused as shit because at the time I was a dumb kid. Suddenly I hear the most demonic screech I've ever heard. I laid back down as still as possible. Turns out other kids also heard it and the next morning, we asked the teachers what the noise was. They said it was a fucking deer. Camping in Greece, we were the only people on the site run by a delightful if slightly crazy lady with no teeth. After we set up our tents we went exploring a bit. We found a caravan tent that still had food on the plates outside it and we even spied a wheelchair at the back of it. Add to that the rolls of fly-covered flypaper and the creepy vibe was pretty damn intense. We continue on and find another tent, well what was left of it. It looked like a bear had torn it to pieces. It was in shreds. And there was stuff all over. creepy meter was off the charts at this point, so OFC we took some pics and decided to name the place Camp Death. Backpacking round Greece involved a lot of ouzo. After we'd got some more supplies, beer, ouzo and beans, from the local shop, we were cooking dinner and some dude in sodding biker leathers turns up and just slowly drags the shredded tent away like it's no big deal. We stayed for 2 nights and even got pissed with the owner lady and her bazillion stray dogs on one night. We had a great time. I was camping in Yellowstone on a cold night and I was asleep in my sleeping bag in my tent when I kinda woke up and felt something warm curled up against my legs, and I kinda snuggled back down because my dog usually sleeps there. Then I realized I wasn't at home, so it wasn't her. So I slowly lift my head to see what's in my tent. 2 baby cougars had come in my tent and curled up with me. Their mum was curled in the corner. I just laid there. It was magical and scary. At around 5 a.m., they got up and left. When I was in high school, my friends and I went out to a really remote spot in the mountains to camp. Just to get there, you needed a pretty serious off-roader. It was about 30 miles up a super rough road. There were river crossings, huge boulders in the road, and tons of sand pits. This road took us all day. And all day we didn't see a single other person. No one passed us, we didn't see anyone camping. Nothing. At one point, one of my friends noted it looked like no one had even driven on the road in a while. Which was weird, because this was in Colorado and roads/trails like this are really popular. Something worth pointing out, this road led into a box canyon, which is basically nature's cul-de-sac. The road we were on was the only road in, and the only road out. All around us was massive cliffs. And another thing, we were deep in the mountains, far from any cell service. On top of that, we were in a box canyon, which even if you're next to a city, never has service. All that said, we eventually got to the spot and set up camp. Every time we went camping, we played Capture the Flag. This trip was no exception. We waited for it to get dark, then started. In the middle of the second round, me and one of my friends, on my team, hop up on the road, which ran parallel to area we were playing in. It seemed like a good way to get around to the other flag. Walking down road, we began to see a glow coming towards us. Our first thought was it's another 4x4 coming towards us. But as it got closer, we realized it was a young woman holding up her phone, looking for service. She was still at a distance, but we could tell she was panicky. She was rushing and stumbling at the same time. She didn't seem drunk. It was weird. We called out, "Hello?" No response. But it wasn't just that she ignored us. It was more like she didn't even realize we were there. We tried again, "You okay?" Nothing. As she's passing us, we realize she's crying. Again, "You okay?" She stumbles right past us, never showing a single sign that she saw us. The whole time, just looking at her phone for service. My friend and I are frozen. We watch her go. Still stumbling, still crying. She rounded a turn, then disappeared. I yell out to my everyone else to meet back at camp. We do. I tell them what we saw. And I'm not proud to admit this, because it seemed like she needed help, but we got creeped out. We said we'd stay in camp that night, and in the morning, we'd go looking. The first thing we do in the morning is decide there must be some other people camped down the road. They must know her. So we go down to the end of the road. There's no sign of anyone. Then we decided to go to the entrance of the road and look for the woman. So we drive to the entrance, which took all day. Nothing. I still feel guilty for not trying harder to help her. But thinking about how she got in that position, it just doesn't make sense. She didn't look like a hiker, she had on regular jeans and a sweater. If she had gotten in the canyon from the other side, it would require a very technical descent. She would have needed gear, and she didn't even have a backpack. We were pretty sure we were the only ones that had driven down that road in a while, so it's not like someone dropped her off or left her. And the whole time we saw her, she was holding up her phone looking for service. If she knew the area at all, she would know there was no way she was going to find service. I don't know what to make of it. But I do know that the image of that woman stumbling in the dark, crying, has been seared in my brain ever since. Last summer we bought a camper and spent the summer and fall camping all over. On one of our first trips to New Hampshire we woke up from the camper to find a huge pile of bear shit right outside the steps and in several areas of our site. Kind of freaked us out a little knowing how close a bear was. We were sleeping outside an abandoned house and suddenly at like 4 AM or something a black car comes to the middle of nowhere and enters the house. Next morning we go into the house and it was full of like broken glasses and gunshots. We ran like souls taken by the devil. Well, this was a few years ago. We, a group of friends, usually go to a farmhouse which is of a relative of our friend located inside a forest, the most beautiful place, peaceful and quiet. So we went there and put a campfire and we had few drinks. I think around past 1 AM, IST, 3 of us went to the river located down at the farmhouse. The path only is through the forest. We stayed there for a while, went further, and as we were high, well, let's just say we were very playful, screaming and everywhere, and suddenly it felt like someone was watching us. We didn't give a thought of that and went back thinking it was the best thing to do. We are almost reaching the house and suddenly someone scolded us like, "Look at the time, is this the time to be roaming here? Go and sleep," in a loud voice, and we all thought it was the relative, but all we could see was a black shadow. We just thought we were hammered and just went up to the house, and the awesome part, some of the friends were still at the fire camp and we looked inside the house to see the relative dead sleeping. We asked if any went by or the relative. They all said no one went from here, only you 3, and it been over an hour. We are waiting for you guys. Well, that made us wake up from the dizziness right away. Girlfriend and I were tent camping and there were maybe only 5 other campers in the campground, all spread apart. Well, in the middle of the night we both awaken because we hear footsteps maybe 20 feet from our tent. We both just lay there dead quiet listening to the footsteps. They were very slow, and not moving around much. No other breathing sounds and it didn't sound particularly heavy. We both thought it was a person. Weirdest part is that after about 30 seconds of that the footsteps just stopped. Like, no trailing off into the distance, nothing. Like they just stopped and that was that. Still don't know how or what that was about. This past weekend I was camping with some friends and my buddy and I decided to go for a hike to scout for elk because we'll be hunting there next month when the season opens up. So we walk through the woods and eventually wind up back on a 2-track road. My buddy is carrying his 2 years/show daughter and we have a few dogs with us. Then out of nowhere we hear the crack of a rifle shot and the very distinct sound of a bullet passing between us. We were standing about 10 feet apart, thinking someone was trying to shoot my dog perhaps. She looks like a coyote. I run up the road into a clearing screaming at whoever was shooting to stop shooting because there were people near. I see a guy standing there with a rifle looking dumber than a box of shit, so I pull my pistol out and tell him he almost shot us and he is making a bunch of excuses, even though he's bird hunting with a rifle and not wearing blaze orange. It got pretty heated and he threatened me before my buddy told him to calm down. Plus we had a kid with us and so did this guy, so no point in escalating the situation, but the guy did tell me he'd find me in town even though he was 100% in the wrong in this situation. I met 2 religious girls and one of them started speaking in tongues to me and told me I could do it if I tried. I was 10 or 15 miles into the backcountry wilderness with a friend on a multi-day backpacking trip. We were trout fishing for our supper on a small stream fairly close to the timberline. Seemingly out of nowhere, a game warden on horseback materialized just a few yards from where I stood. He dismounted, marched right up to me and demanded to have a look at the contents of my creel. It wasn't a problem, but it was very unnerving, which, I'm sure, was his intent, the way he had apparently stalked and snuck up on us. My friend and I weren't novices at being in the backcountry, so we were both a bit humbled how this man had managed to ambush us, especially given the sparseness of the vegetation available to cover his approach. My heart was racing for quite a while after that encounter and I vowed to get better at maintaining my situational awareness. He was a good man, though. Turns out I did have a fish that was a bit outside the size limit due to my misunderstanding the regulation for that particular stream. The game warden just advised me that I needed to get that fish on the fire and eat it tonight. He would have been within his rights to cite me and confiscate my fishing rod and tackle, which would have really stunk. Years ago my girlfriend and I were teachers, and in June of each year, we would take a group of kids camping. We had a 12-person tent set up on our site, which was right next to a small lake. The site included a picnic table and a fire ring. Part of the trip was telling campfire stories about the Jersey Devil, since the campground was located in an area where there had been many sightings over the years. The kids enjoyed being scared and they couldn't wait to return the following year. This was around the 5th annual trip we had taken, and, up to that point, nothing had happened. On the last night after the stories, when the kids were safely asleep, my GF and I sat by the campfire in beach chairs. We had just bought a new puppy and she was tied to the tent on a long lead so she could run around. Suddenly the logs in the fire collapsed and the light from the fire dimmed considerably. Our propane torch that was on the picnic table dimmed at the same time. It became almost pitch black. And that's when the puppy started to growl. She was right next to me and every hair on her back was standing straight up as she stared into the darkness. Suddenly from out of the water comes this large figure about 20 yards from our site. At first, I thought it was a person, but then it bent over and started running on all fours. I could only see the outline of the thing and the back end was higher than the front. It wasn't a bear or a dog or a deer. It looked and ran like something I had never seen. It was in no hurry as it just trotted by and into the woods near our site. I jumped up and ran to my car and turned on the lights. The car lights lit up our campsite, but there was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I told my GF to wake the kids because we were leaving. She was the braver one and convinced me to stay. We eventually calmed down and turned in for the night. I lay down by the tent opening with a large butcher knife and did not sleep until the sun came up. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since, but I swear I saw something that was not a man or an animal. I haven't been back camping since. We found out we were being stalked by a mountain lion. My family ended up leaving early, but my uncles stayed behind to finish off their hunting trip. He actually ended up bagging it just before it pounced, or at least that's the way he tells it. For a bonus, he ended up propping it up with sticks near a tree and told my cousin he forgot his rifle there. Cousin nearly shit himself when his flashlight hit it. I posted this 5 years ago. https://www.reddit.com/r/no sleep/comments/5rbr66/night_eye_camping_trip/ I have shared this story with many of my friends, but I have never written about it until now. It was a camping trip in Oregon during the summer of 1994. This was a large group comprised of family and friends. I can remember at least 8 of us being there, but there could have been a couple others. It's not important because the key events involved only 2 of us. It was myself and Paul, a friend who is a year younger. We were between the ages 15 and 17. There was a stream, Looking Glass nearby, but it was 25 feet down a steep bank. Paul and I had spent the first day gathering wood and exploring the area around the main camp. Because we were teenagers, and we both considered ourselves to be tough and independent guys, we decided to set up our tent as far from the main group as possible. In reality it was only about 100 yards away, but with the trees we were nearly return. Paul and I don't see much of each other these days. We were best man in each other's weddings and live in different towns. But when we see each other it's always fun to reminisce about that night. I'm just months away from turning 40 and that was the most unexplained experience I have ever had. I am glad I was able to share the experience with a friend. Out of sight from them and all we could see was their campfire at night. Also, the creek was quite loud and made it so that our tent and the main camp were not in hearing distance. The tent we set up was an old canvas army tent that had a pole in the middle. The important events happened that first night. Paul and I stayed with the main group after the sun went down, enjoying the campfire and laughter. Since we had no fire of our own, the surrounding woods were pitch black where our tent was. You needed a flashlight to walk around and not trip over something. Since we were about to call it a night, we decided to go pee at the same time. Using my flashlight, we walked towards the creek and we each picked a spot about 10 feet apart. The trees opened up a lot in this area and I was surprised that I could see the water below after I had put my flashlight into my sweatshirt pocket. After we both were done, we just stood there for a minute looking at the water. We were talking, but I can't remember what about. I thought I'd try and prank my friend, so I said, "Paul, there's something over there." Where, he asked. So I grab my flashlight and shine it on the path to my left. Suddenly, about 30 yards away, there are these two glowing eyes looking right at us. We couldn't see anything else, just those two glowing eyes. It seemed as though they were about the height of a large dog. Whatever it wasn't moving. Just watching. Now, when I shined my light, I wasn't expecting to see anything at all. This was a joke after all. That being the case, I wasn't thinking about what it could be. I just blurted out, "Oh my God, there is something there." And we both ran to the tent. That in itself would have made this a memorable trip, but there is a little more to this story. We were both a little freaked out, but we felt safe in the tent. We talked about what it could be, and at the time we settled on coyote, but I have since changed my mind. I believe it was a cougar for a number of reasons that I won't get into. Of course, I can never know for sure. Now, we had zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags and the excitement had almost completely dissipated, and suddenly we hear something big moving towards us. It was coming from the opposite direction of the glowing eyes and our other campers. When I say something big, I mean heavy. It seemed to be stomping the ground as it walked. The noise was scary loud and it quickly came from the distance to being right outside our tent. As soon as we both heard it approach, we instantly quit talking and listened with every fiber of our existence. We were listening with our eyes blinded by the dark, with our skin from the vibrations on the ground, and with our ears that were the only way of knowing exactly where this big heavy creature was. When it came up to our tent, it stopped and got quiet for what seemed like an eternity. The only sound was one or two deep exhales. They sounded like a horse when it exhales. I was both excited and scared, and my teenage mind was just sure a bear was going to come crashing through the walls of our canvas tent. After several seconds, the eternity, it stomped all the way around our tent, all four sides, and without stopping again it traipsed off into the woods, going uphill in the opposite direction of the creek. These two events took place within 30 minutes of each other. I can't explain the big creature. My only theory, because I don't believe in Bigfoot, is that a large bull. At night when I was going to Dubsea, I saw something in the forest. First I thought it's a monster. But it was just a guy preparing game for the morning. I remember I saw a UFO in the sky and watched it disappear. It was very odd. It was almost as if it saw me look at it. I suppose not creepy, but pretty scary. We were camping in Big Bend National Park in Texas. In the middle of the night we heard this rustling outside out text. My dad went outside to check if someone was going through our stuff. Turns out it was a bear going through our stuff. So this was more an overall creepy camping trip, rather than something that happened on the trip. Some background: we are a pretty experienced tent camping family. We like state parks, national parks, generally within a couple hours of home. This past summer I really wanted to go to Salt Fork State Park. It's about 2 hours southeast of where we live, in a very rural part of Red, Ohio. I wanted to go there specifically because it's the one place in Ohio with consistent sightings of Bigfoot. The campground is huge. Loops and loops of sites, with a lot of RV camping. The park seemed pretty busy, in part I think because of a very large Mennonite group that was there. We get to our site, which is a little pocket of tent-only sites right along the tree line. Great sights. One of the hikes that I really wanted to make was to Hossack's Cave. It's a short hike of about a half-mile to the cave. At the trailhead was one of the creepiest things that I have ever seen. A giant angel statue, with a plaque stating that it is in memory of Audrey Parsons, who fell to her death from the top of the cave. There were all kinds of little mementos. Glass flowers, a small My Little Pony, some bracelets, a child's boot. It was the creepiest feeling. Lots of people have died there when they stray from the marked trail, but this memorial with all of its little trinkets just did not sit well with me. I was very, very happy to leave. We did other hikes on that trip, and while we didn't see Bigfoot, I just could not shake the feeling I got from that memorial. I was glad to leave, even though I loved the park and hope to go back one day. One time, when we were sleeping, a group of wild boars attacked the camp and stole my mom's friend's shoe. I was asleep during the entire fight, but I can only imagine how scary it was for the others. When I was in Boy Scouts, Pennsylvania, Troop 303, we made a trip to West Point for the annual Army v. Navy game. Our troop was to spend the night in these really run-down old triangular bunkhouses at an old campground about an hour or so away from the school. Our scoutmasters were really shitty people, never really bothering to check the condition of the place beforehand, so we were all surprised by the terrible, musty and wood-rotten interiors. The bunks were rusty and there were dead bugs everywhere. A lot of us wanted to sleep in the cars instead, but the scoutmaster, a particularly shitty guy in the fold of fucktards watching us, called us pussies and told us to man up. So we grabbed our sleeping bags and did as we were told. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, we started hearing a weird chittering. One of us turned on our flashlights and pointed it up at the vaulted ceiling. Bats. Lots of them. Not surprisingly, someone screamed and the whole nest started wigging out. Everyone started panicking and running around, which only made the bats wig out even more. The parents came running from the other bunkhouse when they heard the screams and got a face full of bats when they opened the door. My dad took me out of the troop not too long after that. Not sure about creepy, but we had tornado sirens go off at 4 a.m. in Minnesota a few years ago. Good times lol. The park people and camp hosts drove around screaming, "Get out of your tents." Now, the storm shelter is the bathroom. We stayed and just held down the tent for half an hour. No tornado touched down, thank God, but it got real dicey. The afternoon beforehand when we arrived there, a huge storm come through, and a small flash flood, and we had one of those weather emergency radios and it went bonkers, flashing lights and a little siren/alarm going nuts. Should have known then it was gonna be a long 24 hours. It's times like this you realize nylon won't help you. I'm not sure where I heard this, but a true story from a wildlife photographer who was by himself in remote wilderness. When he went to get his film developed, he found pictures of himself sleeping. The camera was 5 feet in the air. Nothing too crazy, but I had a leader at a camp when I was little joke about bears in the forest, and my tent was right on the forest edge, so it creeped me out for like an hour. Then I just stayed up with friends playing stupid games and forgot about it. Goddamn frogs, man. All fucking night with that loud ass noise. It got irritating. At one point it seemed like they're talking to you, trying to strike up a conversation. Being stuck in a lightning storm. Lightning. Staying at the shelter at Lost Pond by myself many years ago, quiet starless night, when around 3 a.m. I was suddenly awoken from a deep sleep by what sounded like someone being brutally murdered. I was shaking with fear when about a minute later I heard another, then another all around the pond. I deduced it must be a screech owl, but before that I was ready to run the hell out of there. It started out creepy, but then was quite hilarious. I was 14, camping in a tent with some friends, when I woke up, and heard a guy masturbating outside our tent. Some woman was on her knees coaching him. There were a bunch of people at the campsite next to us, 40 feet away. I quietly woke my buddies, and we started yelling at them. Soon, the people who they were camping with came over. They were all drunk. We soon found out they were married, but not to each other. Their spouses were yelling at them, then the husband started hitting the guy who was jerking off. We just sat there watching and laughing as everyone was yelling and swearing. Just about everyone in that section of the campground woke up and came out to watch. When I was in Scouts, somebody out of our 4 took a shit in our tent and we didn't find out her, and I accidentally locked myself in my sleeping bag when I was 5, I think. When I was a kid, I once saw a pair of purple eyes at night staring at our trailer while I was looking through the window. It was probably a hallucination or something. Went camping, wife and roommate, with a Ouija board, and at the children's graveyard at a haunted cemetery. We washed the car before going in. Well, so no one got out of the car that night. Because TGE back end started bouncing, like someone jumping on the bumper. Something kept hitting the car. Like with their fists. Mind you, we kept TGE windows up. We didn't camp as planned nor use TGE board. Once we got to the gas station with some light. The windows were covered with child's hand prints, TGE bumper was chrome and had footprints. And a few dents in the rear fenders. Good times. Was camping at some old horse corrals. Behind us was a creepy old outhouse in the middle of really thick timber. Completely dark, no sunlight touched it at all, and we heard weird noises coming from it during night. A few days after we left, a wildfire, the Snake River Complex wildfire in Idaho this summer, tore through there and burned the entire forest to the ground. When the fire was contained, we traveled back to the campgrounds and saw everything burned, all except for that patch of timber with the creepy outhouse. My dad was the Boy Scout leader for a few years. One time he couldn't make the whole week, so Mom went out to finish the last 2 days. I was about 6 at the time and tagged along. My brother was there, so I couldn't stay home. Shortly before dawn, we saw the tent flap open and one of the campers sticks his head in with a cup and says in the creepiest whisper voice, "Lemonade," then ran away. 19 years later and I still have no idea if it was lemonade or pee. I went to take a shit and on the way to the shit house a bear stalked me. I stayed in that shitter all night. Sickly looking deer staggered into the campsite, looked around, then dropped dead. Ranger later told us it was rabies. He found bite marks from where some smaller animal, likely a raccoon, infected it. Footsteps around the tent at Uwharrie National Forest and inspecting it later on and finding nothing, waking up to it though at night and waking up the other person in the tent, turning our flashlights on and lying down, hearing the footsteps go around for a while. Was camping out in Joshua Tree at a place called Jellystone Park, and yes, it was a themed campground that had Yogi, Boo Boo, and Cindy in costume that would walk around each day and visit each campsite. One morning was feeling lazy and stayed in the tent sleeping till about 8:30 to 9 o'clock. Was woke up by Boo Boo when he stuck his head in the tent and said, "Wake up little campers." Was creeped out that a stranger was doing that. With my mom's permission of course. But still. After camping alone in the Canadian Rockies for 2 weeks, I had to camp in a regular campground with other people. That was scary. I was glad to get back to the woods. Not really creepy that much because there could be an explanation. Back there when I was in junior high, my school set up a Girl Scout trip and it took place in a military base. We had several activities there, including grouping up and walking through the forest route at night time. Before the activity took off, the supervisor told us some creepy story to us first, not that scary because I was in the back of the long queue and the mic's quality was bad. So basically, almost everyone was scared. On the way before we returned to the meeting point, we met another supervisor. Everyone screamed, then when we found out it's her, the whole group was relieved. Some of us started chatting up like, "You just gave us a heart attack. Since when you were here?" And she answered us that, "Oh, I have been here for a long time now." We were chatting with her for a bit, then split it up, to go to the meeting point nearby. There, our friends went to that supervisor and continued chatting. asking her what made she be there meeting us at that place out of nowhere, and the supervisor had no idea what we were talking about. She insists that she was here where she was all the time. So a friend calls it that she is lying, pranking on us. But what if she is not lying? I did not raise this with other because it might freak everyone out, but it is something I pondered since that time. But then, she could be lying. Skinwalker laughter and screams at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. I had something come into my cabin at night. I woke up to it crouched down by my bedside. My parents took me and a friend camping for what I think was my 7th birthday. It was around sunset, and we needed some kindling to start our fire. So me and my parents and my friends went out into the woods to get some sticks. My mom loved to scare me, and as a 7-year-old it wasn't very hard to do, so she had already jump scared me a couple times while we were out there. Then, all of the sudden, we hear the loudest boom that I've ever heard. It was loud, but you could tell it far away. I couldn't tell you what it was, especially since we were in the middle of nowhere in eastern Washington, in the woods, at a pretty small campsite, and I'm pretty sure that if you were to keep going in the direction of where the sound came from, there would just be more woods. As a little kid, I was pretty terrified obviously, but on top of that, my parents were both pretty spooked, so I knew that they couldn't have possibly been up to it, which was a possibility at the time lol. Not necessarily creepy or eerie, but still very strange. Fox mating calls at midnight. Y'all ever read The Shack? My mom works at Disneyland, so we can get in there for free. Also meaning we got there ALOT. I was maybe 11 and she let me go off by myself with my friend since I knew my way around the park and had a phone she could track me with. Me and my friend had just go off the ride and I said I need to use the restroom, so we went in there. My friend waited outside for me. Keep in mind, I go into a stall and do my stuff, but then I see someone's shoes in front of my stall. Then they banged on the door, really loudly. I got up out my pants on and stood on top of toilet. They kept banging and I closed my eyes. And they were gone when I opened ABT 1 minute later. I opened stall and no one was there. I was washing my hands at this point now and the light just freaking went off and something, touched my shoulder and bro, I ran for the hills after that. It most likely was just someone pulling a prank, but God forbid I ever go in that bathroom again. Never camped frown. Cooking meal for all the camp. When every time I take a shower, I'm hearing a whisper but no one is around. If at night my dog makes weird noises, they font event sound natural look if it was a monster, and also THW footsteps upstairs I hid, and the fact that my window is right next to take hairy basement I nave where we almost never go inside. Saw a dead guy. I'm told that, when I was 3 or 4, I woke up and our tent was leaking. I started crying to my mom that I wanted to go back inside the tent. She had to tell me we already were. Thanks for visiting Reddit Town Hall. Have a great day.